The unlikely encounter. Ethan trudged through the barren landscape of Helios 7, his boots crunching on the cracked, dusty ground. The twin suns burned mercilessly above, casting eerie shadows over the jagged rocks and twisted metal debris scattered across the planet's surface. His oxygen meter blinked a steady yellow, still enough air, but not for long. He adjusted his visor and scanned the horizon, hoping to spot something valuable among the ruins of this abandoned mining outpost. Scavenging was a lonely, dangerous job, but it paid well, when there was anything worth finding. Most of the time, Ethan returned to his ship empty-handed, questioning why he even bothered. But today felt different. Something about the silence, the stillness, made him uneasy. He wasn't sure if it was his instincts or just paranoia, but the air seemed heavier, like the planet itself was holding its breath. As he climbed over a rusted outcrop, a faint glimmer caught his eye. It wasn't the dull sheen of old mining equipment or the reflection of his own helmet. No, this was something else, a metallic object half buried in the dirt, glinting faintly under the sunlight. Ethan crouched down and brushed away the dust with his gloved hand. His heart skipped a beat. A spaceship, or at least what was left of one. The hull was sleek and unlike anything he'd seen before, its surface etched with alien symbols that glowed faintly. The ship had clearly crashed long ago, its once majestic frame now a mangled wreck. Wires and panels jutted out at odd angles, and a faint trail of black smoke rose from its rear engines. Curiosity got the better of him. Ethan drew his blaster, just in case, and cautiously approached the ship. He peered inside through a shattered window. But the interior was dark. Just as he was about to turn away, a faint voice crackled through his comm system. "Human, can you hear me?" Ethan froze. The voice was soft but urgent, and definitely not human. He glanced around, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking in the shadows. But there was no one. The voice came again, weaker this time. "Please, help me." His grip on the blaster tightened. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing in the emptiness. There was no reply, only a faint buzzing in his earpiece. Against his better judgment, Ethan climbed through the broken window, his boots landing with a thud inside the ship. The interior was even more alien than he'd imagined. The walls pulsed faintly, almost like they were alive, and the air was thick with a strange metallic scent. As he moved deeper into the wreck, he saw sparks flying from damaged consoles and pools of an iridescent liquid spreading across the floor. He stepped carefully, his blaster raised, until he reached what appeared to be the cockpit. And there she was. The alien woman was slumped against the control panel, her body partially pinned beneath a fallen beam. Her skin glowed faintly, a mesmerizing shade of silver, and her large, luminous eyes fluttered open as she saw him. She was injured, badly. Her breathing was shallow, and the glow of her skin flickered like a dying light bulb. "Human," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You found me." Ethan stared, unable to speak. He'd seen aliens before, but nothing like her. She was beautiful in a strange, otherworldly way. But there was no time to admire her now. She was clearly in pain, and the ship creaked ominously, as if it might collapse at any moment. "What happened?" he asked, finally finding his voice. "My ship. Attacked. Crash." She gasped, her words fragmented. "The core. Failing. I need." She winced, unable to finish her sentence. Ethan glanced around the cockpit. The controls were completely fried, and the displays flashed red warnings in a language he didn't understand. Whatever had brought her down, it wasn't just an accident. Someone, or something, had wanted her dead. "Can you move?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She shook her head weakly. "No, the beam." Ethan hesitated. Helping her would be risky. She was an alien, and for all he knew, this could be some kind of trap. But leaving her here felt wrong. He couldn't explain it, but there was something about her, something that made him want to trust her. "All right," he said, sliding his blaster into its holster. "I'll get you out of here." As he gripped the beam, the ship groaned under his weight, and a shower of sparks rained down from above. He ignored it, focusing all his strength on lifting the metal. It was heavier than he expected, and for a moment, he thought he wouldn't be able to move it. But with a final grunt, he managed to push it aside. The alien woman let out a small gasp of relief. "Thank you." Ethan helped her to her feet, or rather, to her strange, digitigrade legs. She leaned heavily on him, her glowing skin warm against his suit. "We need to get out of here," he said, glancing nervously at the flickering walls. "This ship isn't going to hold much longer." But as they made their way toward the exit, she stopped suddenly, clutching his arm. "Wait," she said, her voice urgent. "Before we leave, you must make a choice." Ethan frowned. "What choice?" She met his gaze, her luminous eyes filled with both desperation and hope. "My life depends on you now. There is one chance to save me, but it will come at a cost. Will you take it?" The ship groaned again, louder this time, and Ethan felt a jolt of fear. He didn't know what she meant or what the cost might be. But as he looked at her, injured and vulnerable, yet still radiating an unearthly strength, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't walk away. The impossible task. The desolate wasteland stretched endlessly before Ethan, its cracked, rust-colored surface rippling with heat waves from the blazing suns. Every step felt heavier as he trudged through the barren terrain, his oxygen tank's meter dipping closer to the red. Beside him, the alien woman, Lyra, clung to consciousness, her glow dimming with each passing moment. She was leaning against the makeshift sled Ethan had fashioned from scraps of her wrecked ship, her luminous eyes half closed. "You don't have much time," she murmured weakly. Her voice echoed faintly in his earpiece, a blend of exhaustion and urgency. Ethan adjusted the straps on his pack, his mind racing. Lyra had explained what she needed: an energy core stabilizer made from a rare crystalline substance called zorhium. The substance was known to exist only in the deep fissures of Helios 7's wastelands, places most scavengers avoided like the plague. Not only was the terrain treacherous, but the area teemed with predators and rival scavengers who wouldn't think twice about killing for even a handful of supplies. "Don't worry," Ethan said, though his own confidence wavered. "I've been through worse." A faint smile touched Lyra's lips, though it quickly faded. "The zorhium. It reacts to heat. You'll find it glowing blue under the ground. But be careful. The creatures here are drawn to its energy. It sustains them." "Of course it does," Ethan muttered, shaking his head. As if the task wasn't hard enough, now he had to deal with energy-hungry predators. Still, he couldn't leave her to die. Something about her, a mix of vulnerability and quiet strength, made walking away impossible. They stopped at the edge of a jagged canyon, the wind howling through its depths like a mournful wail. Ethan set the sled down carefully and knelt beside Lyra. Her breathing was shallow, and the soft glow of her skin was almost completely gone. "I'll be quick," he said, hoping it was true. "Stay here and keep quiet. I'll bring back the zorhium before you know it." She caught his arm, her grip surprisingly strong despite her condition. "Ethan, you need to know. If you fail, it's not just my life that will end. My ship, it carries technology your kind hasn't even dreamed of. If it falls into the wrong hands, it could mean the end of your world." Ethan frowned. "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" She closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. "Because you wouldn't have believed me. But now you've seen, and you've chosen to help. That's enough." Her words hung in the air as Ethan turned and began his descent into the canyon. The rocks were sharp and unstable, crumbling beneath his boots with every step. He switched on his visor's heat scanner, searching for the telltale blue glow Lyra had described. The deeper he went, the darker and cooler it became, the oppressive heat of the suns replaced by an eerie chill. After what felt like hours, Ethan spotted it, a faint, shimmering blue light emanating from a cluster of jagged crystals embedded in the canyon wall. Relief flooded him, but it was short-lived. As he approached, the ground beneath him trembled, and a low growl echoed through the cavern. Ethan froze. From the shadows emerged a massive creature, its scaled body glinting faintly in the dim light. Its eyes were a piercing white, unblinking, and locked onto him. The beast moved with a predator's grace, its razor-sharp claws clicking against the rocky ground. "Great," Ethan muttered, backing away slowly. "You just had to show up, didn't you?" The creature roared, a deafening sound that sent vibrations through the canyon walls. It lunged toward him, and Ethan dove to the side, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws. Scrambling to his feet, he fired a warning shot from his blaster. The bolt struck the creature's armored hide, leaving a scorch mark, but otherwise doing nothing. "Okay," Ethan said, panting. "Plan B." He scanned the area quickly, spotting a cluster of loose rocks above the creature. If he could just lure it underneath. "Hey, over here," he shouted, waving his arms. The beast turned, snarling, and charged. At the last second, Ethan dove out of the way, firing his blaster at the rocks. The shot hit its mark, and the rocks came tumbling down, trapping the creature beneath a heavy pile of rubble. Ethan didn't wait to see if it would stay down. He sprinted to the crystals and began prying them loose, his hands trembling as he worked. Each shard he pulled free glowed faintly in his grasp, their energy humming softly against his skin. He stuffed them into his pack, his heart pounding. The ground trembled again, and Ethan realized with horror that the trapped creature wasn't alone. In the distance, more growls echoed, growing louder with each passing second. "Time to go," he muttered, slinging the pack over his shoulder. He raced back up the canyon, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. His legs burned with the effort, and every breath felt like fire in his lungs. As he reached the top, he saw Lyra waiting for him, her glow barely visible in the twilight. "Ethan," she called weakly, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "I got it," he shouted, skidding to a halt beside her. He dumped the pack onto the sled and quickly secured it. "Now let's get out of here before things get worse." He grabbed the sled's handles and began pulling, his muscles straining with the effort. Behind them, the creature's roars grew louder, but Ethan didn't look back. He focused on the path ahead, his determination fueled by the faint, grateful smile on Lyra's face. For now, they had survived. But Ethan knew the worst was yet to come. A dangerous alliance. The wasteland stretched endlessly in every direction, its barren expanse broken only by jagged outcroppings of rock and the occasional skeletal remains of long-dead creatures. Ethan pushed forward, dragging the makeshift sled that carried Lyra and the precious Zorvium crystals. Each step felt like an eternity, his body aching under the relentless heat of Helios 7's twin suns. Lyra's condition was worsening. Her glow, once a soft, otherworldly silver, was now barely visible, like the dying embers of a fire. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, and her voice had grown weaker with every word. "You're running out of time," she managed, her luminous eyes flickering open to meet his. "I know," Ethan muttered, his tone clipped. He wasn't angry at her, just at the universe for putting him in this situation. "But I can't do much about that if we don't keep moving." Suddenly, a mechanical whirring sound broke the oppressive silence. Ethan froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his blaster. From behind a nearby rock, a sleek metallic drone emerged, its design unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. It hovered silently, its single red eye locking onto him. "Intruder detected," a robotic voice announced. The drone's weapons, two sleek, retractable blasters, emerged from its sides. "State your purpose or face immediate termination." "Great," Ethan muttered under his breath. "Just what I needed." He raised his hand slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "Listen, I'm just passing through," he said, trying to keep his tone calm. I'm not here to cause trouble, just trying to save her. He gestured toward Lyra, who was too weak to lift her head. The drone hovered closer, scanning both him and the sled. Its red eye narrowed, the mechanical equivalent of suspicion. The life form you carry is of Class X origin. Unauthorized interaction with Class X entities is strictly prohibited. Class X, Ethan repeated, glancing at Lyra. She had mentioned her ship carried technology far beyond human understanding, but this was the first time he'd heard her species categorized like that. Look, I don't care what class she is. She's dying, and I'm trying to help her. The drone's weapons hummed ominously. Unauthorized assistance to Class X entities constitutes a violation of planetary regulations. You have 10 seconds to comply. Ethan gritted his teeth. The last thing he needed was a firefight with a heavily armed drone, but he couldn't let it stop him now. His mind raced, searching for a solution. Then he remembered something Lyra had said earlier. Technology far beyond your kind's understanding. Wait, Ethan said, lowering his hand slightly. She's not just any Class X entity. She's carrying vital data, information that could prevent a planetary disaster. If you kill her, that data is lost forever. The drone paused, its red eye flickering as if processing his words. Specify the nature of this data. Ethan hesitated. He had no idea what kind of data Lyra's ship actually carried, but he had to bluff convincingly. It's coordinates, he said, improvising. Coordinates to a cache of advanced technology that could revolutionize planetary defenses. She was on her way to deliver it when her ship was attacked. The drone's weapons powered down slightly, though they remained trained on him. Verification required. Ethan glanced at Lyra, hoping she was conscious enough to back him up. Her eyes fluttered open, and she managed a weak nod. He speaks the truth, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The data must be preserved. The drone hovered silently for a moment before retracting its weapons. Assistance authorized. Proceed with caution. Any attempt to deviate from stated objectives will result in termination. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Thanks for the vote of confidence, he muttered. The drone began scanning the sled, its mechanical arms moving with precision. Energy core damage detected. Zorvium crystals will stabilize the core, but manual reconfiguration is required. The process is highly dangerous and has a failure rate of 73%. Of course it does, Ethan said, rolling his eyes. Let me guess, you're not going to help. Incorrect, the drone replied. Assistance protocols engage. To Ethan's surprise, the drone extended a small compartment from its side, revealing a set of intricate tools. You will follow my instructions precisely, it said. Deviation will result in catastrophic failure. Sounds like a plan, Ethan said, kneeling beside the sled. As the drone began issuing rapid-fire instructions, Ethan worked quickly, his hands moving with a precision born of necessity. The Zorvium crystals were more fragile than he'd expected, their surfaces shimmering with an almost liquid quality. Each time he adjusted their placement, they emitted a soft hum that resonated through his fingertips. You're doing well, Lyra whispered, her voice faint, but filled with something resembling hope. Don't start congratulating me yet, Ethan said, his focus unwavering. Sweat dripped down his face as he carefully aligned the final crystal. The drone's red eye blinked rapidly, a sign of its approval. Core stabilization at 87%, it announced. Further adjustments required. Before Ethan could respond, a low growl echoed from the shadows. His heart sank as he turned to see 3 massive creatures emerging from the rocks. They were unlike anything he'd faced before, hulking beasts with spiked tails and glowing eyes that mirrored the Zorvium's blue light. Hostiles detected, the drone said, its weapons activating. Defensive measures initiated. Yeah, no kidding, Ethan muttered, drawing his blaster. Let's hope your aim is as good as your threats. The creatures charged, their claws tearing through the ground as they lunged toward the sled. Ethan fired rapidly, the bolt striking one of the beasts and sending it sprawling. The drone unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, taking down another. But the third was closing in fast, its jaws snapping dangerously close to Lyra. Ethan didn't think, he moved. Grabbing a nearby shard of Zorvium, he drove it into the creature's side. The beast let out an ear-splitting roar, its body convulsing before collapsing in a heap. Stabilization complete, the drone announced calmly, as if the battle hadn't just unfolded. Ethan panted, his body trembling with adrenaline. "Let's get out of here before something else shows up." The drone nodded, or at least Ethan imagined it did. Together, they began the arduous trek back to Lyra's ship, the Zorvium crystals glowing faintly in the fading light. For the first time, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope, but he knew better than to celebrate too soon. The real challenges were just beginning. The Predator's lair. The canyon loomed dark and foreboding as Ethan stood at its edge, peering into the shadowy depths below. The faint hum of Zorvium crystals echoed from somewhere deep within, beckoning him forward. His heart pounded in his chest, not from the exertion of the climb, but from the oppressive sense of dread that seemed to radiate from the very ground. Beside him, the drone hovered silently, its red eye glowing faintly in the dim light. "The Zorvium deposits are concentrated in this area," the drone said, its voice as cold and mechanical as ever. "However, heat signatures indicate the presence of a large predator nearby. Proceed with extreme caution." Ethan let out a humorless laugh. "Caution isn't exactly an option right now," he muttered, adjusting the straps on his pack. "Let's just hope this thing isn't hungry." The drone didn't respond, but its weapons remained extended, a silent reminder of the dangers ahead. Ethan took a deep breath and began his descent, the rocky terrain shifting treacherously beneath his boots. Every step felt like a gamble, the sharp cliffs threatening to give way at any moment. As he ventured deeper into the canyon, the air grew colder, the oppressive heat of the twin suns replaced by an eerie stillness. The faint blue glow of the Zorvium crystals became more pronounced, illuminating the walls with an ethereal light. It was beautiful, in a way, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. "Life form detected," the drone announced abruptly, its red eye swiveling toward a dark crevice in the canyon wall. Ethan froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his blaster. From the shadows emerged a massive creature, its scaled body shimmering faintly with the same blue hue as the crystals. It was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, an amalgamation of razor-sharp claws, piercing white eyes, and a gaping maw filled with jagged teeth. The beast moved with a predatory grace, its tail lashing behind it like a whip. "Hostile identified," the drone said, its weapons locking onto the creature. "Engaging." The drone fired a volley of energy blasts, the bolt striking the beast and illuminating the canyon in brief flashes of light. But the creature barely flinched. It let out a guttural roar that reverberated through the canyon, shaking loose rocks and sending a chill down Ethan's spine. "Great," Ethan muttered, drawing his blaster. "Looks like this one doesn't go down easy." The beast lunged, its claws slashing through the air. Ethan dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the attack. He fired a shot at its exposed flank, the bolt striking true but doing little more than angering it further. The drone circled above, firing rapidly, but the creature's thick hide seemed impervious to its attacks. "This isn't working," Ethan shouted, scrambling to his feet. "We need a new plan." The drone paused for a moment, its red eye flickering as it processed his words. "Zorvium energy output detected within the creature," it said. "Speculation. The predator has adapted to consume the crystals for sustenance. Direct attack on its core may yield results." Ethan glanced at the glowing veins running along the creature's sides. The idea of getting close enough to strike its core wasn't exactly appealing, but he didn't have much of a choice. "Got it," he said through gritted teeth. "Cover me." The drone unleashed another barrage of fire, distracting the beast as Ethan darted forward. He dodged its swiping claws, the sheer size of the creature making every movement feel like a game of life or death. As he closed the distance, he spotted the faint glow of the Zorvium crystals embedded in its chest, a weak point. With a burst of adrenaline, Ethan leaped onto the creature's back, clinging to its jagged scales as it thrashed wildly. He struggled to maintain his grip, the beast's movements threatening to throw him off at any moment. Drawing his knife, he plunged it into the creature's side, aiming for the glowing core. The beast let out a deafening roar, its body convulsing violently. The glow of the crystals flickered, and for a moment, Ethan thought he might have done it. But the creature wasn't finished yet. It reared back, slamming itself into the canyon wall in an attempt to dislodge him. "Ethan." Lyra's voice crackled faintly in his earpiece, her tone filled with urgency. "You must strike again. Its core is weakening." "I'm trying," Ethan shouted, his voice strained. His arms burned from the effort of holding on, but he gritted his teeth and raised the knife once more. With a final, desperate thrust, he drove it into the center of the glowing core. The reaction was immediate. The beast let out one last ear-piercing roar before collapsing, its massive body hitting the ground with a thunderous crash. Ethan rolled away, panting and covered in dirt and sweat. The faint glow of the Zorvium crystals faded, leaving the canyon in near total darkness. "Core neutralized," the drone said, its voice as calm as ever. "Threat eliminated." Ethan sat up, wincing at the bruises that were already forming. "Yeah, thanks for the play-by-play," he muttered, pushing himself to his feet. He approached the creature's lifeless body, carefully prying a shard of Zorvium from its core. The shard pulsed faintly in his hand, a reminder of the immense power it held. "We've got what we need," he said, slipping the shard into his pack. "Let's get back to Lyra before something else shows up." The drone hovered silently beside him as he began the long climb back to the canyon's edge. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and exhaustion threatened to take over, but he pushed through. Lyra was depending on him, and he wasn't about to let her down. As he reached the top of the canyon, he spotted Lyra waiting for him, her faint glow barely visible in the twilight. Her eyes lit up with relief as he approached, the Zorvium shard held triumphantly in his hand. "You did it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Ethan managed a tired smile. "Yeah," he said, collapsing beside her. "But something tells me the hard part's just getting started." Betrayal and revelation. The journey back to Lyra's damaged ship was anything but quiet. Ethan's mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. The Zorvium shards pulsed faintly in his pack, their glow a reminder of the brutal fight he'd endured to obtain them. Lyra, still weak but conscious, sat in the sled, her gaze distant and thoughtful. The drone hovered nearby, its red eye scanning the area for any threats. "We're close," Ethan said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. The wreckage of Lyra's ship came into view, its twisted metal frame standing stark against the barren landscape. For the first time in hours, Ethan allowed himself a flicker of hope. They were almost there. But something was wrong. The first thing Ethan noticed was the silence. The oppressive, almost tangible silence that hung in the air like a warning. The second was the footprints, deep, heavy imprints leading to the ship. They weren't his. "Someone's here," he muttered, his hand instinctively going to his blaster. Lyra tensed, her faint glow flickering. "Be careful," she whispered. "If they found us, they may not leave without a fight." Ethan approached cautiously, his blaster drawn. The wreckage appeared undisturbed at first glance, but as he moved closer, the faint sound of voices reached his ears. He ducked behind a twisted piece of metal and peeked around the corner. A group of scavengers was gathered near the ship, their makeshift weapons gleaming in the faint light. At their center stood a man Ethan recognized all too well. Dax, a ruthless scavenger who thrived on intimidation and violence. Dax was examining one of the Zorvium crystals that had spilled from the sled, his eyes alight with greed. "This is the good stuff," Dax said, his voice carrying an edge of excitement. "Alien tech like this could fetch a fortune on the black market. Looks like we hit the jackpot, boys." Ethan's grip tightened on his blaster. He'd crossed paths with Dax before and had barely escaped with his life. The man had no qualms about killing anyone who stood between him and profit. "What do we do?" Lyra's voice was barely audible, her fear palpable. Ethan glanced at her, his mind racing. They couldn't fight Dax and his crew head-on, not without risking the Zorvium or Lyra's life. But leaving wasn't an option either. He needed a plan, and fast. Before he could act, Dax's gaze shifted, and his eyes locked onto Lyra. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Well, well," he said, stepping closer. "What do we have here?" "An alien survivor. Bet she's worth even more than the crystals." Ethan's blood ran cold. Dax raised a hand, signaling his crew to grab her. Two men stepped forward, their weapons trained on Ethan as they closed in on the sled. "Stay back," Ethan shouted, stepping into the open and aiming his blaster at Dax. "Let her go, or I swear I'll—" "You'll what?" Dax interrupted, smirking. "Shoot me. Go ahead. But you're outnumbered, and we both know you won't get a second shot." Ethan's jaw clenched. He needed to stall, to buy time for some kind of miracle. "Do you even know what you're dealing with?" he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "That ship isn't just wreckage, it's armed. One wrong move, and you'll all be vaporized." Dax hesitated, his confidence faltering for a moment. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Ethan gestured toward the ship. "Go ahead. Touch anything, and see what happens." As if on cue, a faint hum emanated from the ship, a sound Ethan hadn't heard before. Lyra's eyes widened, and she glanced at him. "The defense mechanism," she whispered. "It's activating." Ethan didn't know what she meant, but he played along. "You've got seconds to get out of here," he said, his tone firm. "Or that ship will make sure none of us leave alive." Dax's smirk disappeared, replaced by a scowl. He motioned for his men to back off. "Fine," he said. "But this isn't over, Ethan. That tech is mine. And so is she." He turned and stalked away, his crew following reluctantly. As the scavengers disappeared into the distance, Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He turned to Lyra, who looked pale and shaken. "What just happened?" he asked. "That ship really has defenses." Lyra nodded slowly. "It does. But they're incomplete. The system activates as a warning, but it can't actually fire. I didn't think it would scare them off." Ethan chuckled humorlessly. "Good thing they didn't call our bluff." The relief was short-lived. As they approached the ship, Lyra's expression grew somber. "Ethan," she said, her voice low, "there's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" he asked, frowning. She hesitated, as if unsure how to begin. "The Zorvium crystals. They aren't just fuel. They're alive. They're a part of my species' biology, a connection to our homeworld. If the scavengers return and take them, they'll be exploiting something far more valuable than they realize." Ethan stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "So it's not just about saving you," he said slowly. "It's about protecting your entire species." Lyra nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Yes, and I fear this isn't the last time we'll face danger." Ethan tightened his grip on his blaster. "Then we better be ready for whatever comes next." The faint hum of the ship's warning system lingered in the air, a reminder that their fight was far from over. But for now, they had a moment to regroup, and Ethan was determined to use it wisely. The ultimate sacrifice. Ethan stood at the threshold of Lyra's battered ship, his mind racing as he stared at the glowing Zorvium shards cradled in his hands. Their faint hum resonated through the air, filling the silence like a heartbeat. Behind him, Lyra sat slumped against the sled, her glowing skin flickering faintly. The ship's interior lights sputtered weakly, a visual reminder of how little time they had left. The core's destabilization is accelerating, the drone announced, its red eye scanning the damaged ship. Critical failure in approximately 17 minutes. 17 minutes, Ethan muttered, running a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. That's not much time. Lyra's voice, weak but steady, broke the tension. Ethan, listen to me. The Zorvium must be placed into the core chamber manually. But the radiation levels inside. No one can survive long enough to complete the task. Ethan froze, the weight of her words sinking in. He turned to face her, his brow furrowed. What are you saying? She met his gaze, her luminous eyes filled with an unsettling calm. I'll do it. My body is already failing. If I use the last of my energy, I can stabilize the core long enough for you to escape. It's the only way. No. The word came out sharper than he intended. He shook his head vehemently. No way. We didn't come this far just for you to throw your life away. Lyra managed a faint smile. This is bigger than me, Ethan. Bigger than you. If the core isn't stabilized, the ship's technology and the knowledge it carries will be lost forever. My species' legacy will be erased. Ethan clenched his fists, anger and helplessness warring within him. There has to be another way, he insisted. You said the core chamber is deadly, right? But what about me? I'm human. Maybe I can withstand it long enough to. You wouldn't survive, Lyra interrupted gently. The radiation would destroy you within seconds. Please, let me do this. It's my duty. Ethan stared at her, his heart pounding. He knew she was right, but the thought of losing her, of watching her sacrifice herself while he stood by, powerless, was unbearable. The drone, ever pragmatic, interjected. Alternative solution identified, it said. A temporary radiation shield can be constructed using the ship's auxiliary systems. However, it will only provide protection for approximately 2 minutes. 2 minutes, Ethan repeated, his mind racing. Is that enough time to stabilize the core? With precision and efficiency, stabilization can be achieved in 1 minute and 37 seconds. The drone replied. The margin for error is minimal. Ethan turned to Lyra, his jaw set. Then that's what we'll do. You're not going in there alone. I'll help you. Her eyes widened in surprise. Ethan, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he said firmly. If this is the only way, then we're doing it together. Lyra stared at him for a moment before nodding, a flicker of hope lighting her expression. All right, she said softly. Let's do it. The drone worked quickly, its mechanical arms assembling the makeshift shield from scraps of the ship's auxiliary panels. Meanwhile, Ethan and Lyra prepared the Zorgium shards, arranging them in the precise order required to stabilize the core. The tension in the air was palpable, each second ticking by like a drumbeat. As the drone finished its task, it hovered closer to Ethan. Shield functionality at 83%. Time limit, 2 minutes. Proceed with caution. Ethan strapped the shield to his back, the weight of it pressing against his shoulders. He glanced at Lyra, who stood beside him, her faint glow steady now despite her weakened state. Ready? He asked. She nodded, her expression resolute. Ready. They stepped into the core chamber together. The moment they crossed the threshold, a wave of heat and energy slammed into them. The radiation so intense, it made Ethan's skin crawl. The shield absorbed most of it, but he could feel the strain in the air, the faint crackle of energy that seemed to whisper warnings in his ear. The core loomed ahead, a massive, pulsating sphere of light and energy. It pulsed erratically, its glow fluctuating like a heartbeat on the verge of stopping. Ethan could feel the weight of its instability, the sense that it could explode at any moment. Place the Zorvium shards in the slots, Lyra instructed, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. I'll calibrate the energy flow. Ethan moved quickly, his hands trembling as he inserted the shards into the glowing slots surrounding the core. Each shard emitted a faint hum as it connected, the sound blending with the core's pulse in a strange, harmonious rhythm. First shard locked, the drone announced. Stabilization at 23%. Ethan glanced at the timer on his shield. 1 minute left. Hurry. He called to Lyra. I'm almost there, she replied, her hands dancing over the controls with practiced precision. The core's glow began to steady, its erratic pulses smoothing into a more rhythmic pattern. Stabilization at 72%, the drone said. Radiation levels increasing. Ethan inserted the final shard, the core's hum growing louder as its glow intensified. Done, he shouted. What now? Lyra pressed a final sequence of buttons, her movements deliberate and calm. Now, we wait, she said, stepping back as the core began to stabilize fully. It's working. Ethan checked the timer. 20 seconds left. We need to get out of here, he said, grabbing her arm. But Lyra shook her head. The system needs one final adjustment, she said. I have to. Before she could finish, the drone intervened. Radiation levels critical. Evacuation mandatory. Ethan didn't hesitate. He pulled Lyra toward the exit, the shield's timer hitting 0 just as they crossed the threshold. Behind them, the core pulsed steadily now, its glow a beacon of stability. They collapsed just outside the chamber, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The drone hovered above them, its red eye blinking. Core stabilized. Mission success. Ethan turned to Lyra, his chest heaving. We did it, he said, a faint smile breaking through his exhaustion. She nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. Yes, she whispered. We did. But as they lay there, the realization sank in. This was only the beginning. The core might be stable, but their fight was far from over. The redemption. Ethan leaned against the scorched hull of Lyra's ship, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths. The core's rhythmic hum echoed faintly in the background, a soothing reminder that, for now, the immediate danger was over. Lyra sat beside him, her glow stronger than before, though still fragile. The Zorvium crystals had done their job, but the ordeal had taken a toll on them both. The drone hovered nearby, scanning the ship's systems with mechanical precision. Core stabilization complete. Structural integrity at 42%. Probability of long-term survival, 18%. Ethan shot the drone a glare. Could you be a little less cheerful about it? Lyra managed a faint laugh, her luminous eyes meeting his. For what it's worth, Ethan, thank you. I didn't think anyone would risk so much for a stranger. He waved a hand dismissively, though a flicker of warmth spread through his chest. Don't mention it. Besides, I couldn't let you die. Not when you still owe me an explanation. She tilted her head, her expression curious. An explanation. Yeah, he said, gesturing to the ship around them. This isn't just about you or your people, is it? There's something bigger going on here, something you haven't told me. Lyra hesitated, her glow dimming slightly. You're right, she admitted softly. There's more to this than I shared. My ship wasn't just carrying technology. It holds a blueprint for an energy system capable of reshaping the galaxy. A system that could end wars, eliminate resource scarcity. But in the wrong hands, it could destroy entire civilizations. Ethan's jaw tightened. And those scavengers, Dax and his crew, they know about this. She nodded. They don't understand the full scope of it, but they know it's valuable. If they get their hands on it. Then we're all in trouble, Ethan finished grimly. He pushed himself to his feet, brushing dirt from his jacket. All right, what's the plan? Lyra looked at him, surprised. You're staying. Of course I'm staying, he said with a shrug. What kind of idiot saves someone just to abandon them halfway through the fight? Her glow brightened slightly, a silent acknowledgement of his loyalty. The plan is simple, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. We need to get the ship airborne. Once it's operational, I can send a distress signal to my people. They'll come for us, but only if the ship's systems are fully functional. Ethan glanced at the ship's damaged frame, the flickering lights, and the sparking consoles. That's a big if. "Lyra, I know," she said quietly, "but it's our only option." The hours that followed were a blur of frantic repairs and tense silences. Ethan worked alongside the drone, patching circuits and rerouting power, while Lyra guided them through the ship's alien systems. Despite the language barrier, her instructions were clear, and Ethan found himself marveling at her resilience. Even in her weakened state, she was a force to be reckoned with. But the sense of urgency never faded. Dax and his crew were still out there, and Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before they returned. As he tightened the final bolt on a control panel, the ship's interior lights flickered to life, casting a pale glow over the cockpit. Lyra let out a relieved sigh, her glow brightening slightly. "The main systems are online," she said. "We're ready to send the signal." Ethan wiped sweat from his brow. "Good. Let's hope your people are close." She moved to the central console, her hands gliding over the controls with practiced ease. The hum of the ship grew louder, and a faint pulse of energy radiated outward, disappearing into the night sky. "The signal is sent," she said, turning to Ethan. "Now we wait." The wait didn't last long. A sharp metallic clang echoed through the ship, followed by muffled voices. Ethan's stomach sank. "Dax," he muttered, reaching for his blaster. "They're back." Lyra's expression hardened. "They can't take the ship," she said firmly. "If they do." "They won't," Ethan interrupted. He turned to the drone. "Can this thing fight?" "Defensive capabilities are operational," the drone replied. "Probability of success, 64%. Ethan smirked. "I'll take those odds." He positioned himself near the entrance, blaster at the ready, as the sounds of approaching footsteps grew louder. The first scavenger to enter barely had time to raise his weapon before Ethan fired, the bolt striking true and sending the man sprawling. Chaos erupted as the rest of Dax's crew stormed the ship, their shouts mixing with the whine of blaster fire. The drone joined the fray, its energy weapons cutting through the attackers with ruthless efficiency. Ethan moved with practiced precision, his shots deliberate and unerring. But the scavengers kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. In the midst of the chaos, Dax appeared, his weapon trained on Lyra. "Step away from the console," he barked, his voice cold and commanding. Lyra didn't flinch. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," she said, her tone calm despite the danger. "If you take this ship, you'll doom us all." Dax sneered. "Nice try, alien. But I'm not falling for your tricks." Before he could fire, Ethan tackled him from behind, the two men crashing to the floor in a tangle of limbs. Dax fought viciously, his strength fueled by desperation, but Ethan's determination won out. With a final, well-placed punch, Dax went limp, his weapon clattering to the floor. Ethan staggered to his feet, his chest heaving. "Are you all right?" he called to Lyra. She nodded, her glow steady. "I'm fine. But we need to leave now." The ship shuddered as its engines roared to life, lifting off the ground with a lurch that sent the remaining scavengers scrambling for cover. Ethan collapsed into the co-pilot's seat, his hands trembling as he strapped himself in. Lyra's hands moved over the controls, her focus unwavering. "Hold on," she said. "This might be rough." The ship shot into the sky, leaving the scavengers and the dangers of Helios-7 far behind. As the planet's surface grew smaller in the viewport, Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "We made it," he said, a note of disbelief in his voice. Lyra turned to him, her expression softening. "We did," she said quietly. "Thanks to you." Ethan managed a tired smile. "Guess that makes us even." But as they drifted into the vast expanse of space, he couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. There were still questions to be answered, enemies to face, and a galaxy to protect. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt ready for whatever came next.